morning, everyone. This is Be'ilui Nishmat, Alice Faiza, Bat Yosef Naim Vesalima. Now, we have a very interesting story about Yehoshua. Yehoshua ben Nun decided to send so-called spies, I'll say so-called, you'll see in a moment, just before they went into Israel. But that's interesting because Moshe Rabbeinu, he had a bit of a rebellion in the camp, and they insisted on sending spies. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu answers was, Tishlach lacha, you want to send, send. You don't want to send, don't send. And whereas with Yehoshua, he didn't ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's not telling to do it. But who were these spies and what were these spies, or so-called spies, because the translation is not quite correct. Because they're told, lachrosh et haaretz, to plow the land. Plowing the land means dig deep into the land, dig deep and find out what is going on. But there's a reason behind it. The other big difference was the whole Am Yisrael were totally united, and they wanted to go into Israel, and nobody had any doubts what HaKadosh Baruch Hu could do for them. So that was a very, very big difference. Unity always gave the Jewish people power. Now, what happened was they went in, and it's interesting, the word lachrosh is close to the words chiresh, deaf. Chiresh is deaf, and cheres is, of course, pottery. But the chiresh deaf is an important lesson, not only here, but with everybody in their lives, because we have to be deaf. You know, it's crazy people who built up this world. I mean, for Gorbachev to take on what he did, it was a big risk, and for Mao Zedong to do what he did, that was incredible. In fact, it was impossible. And the scientists, the doctors, the physicians, and the inventors, and of course, all of the politicians, they were completely crazy. Everybody said, you're mad. But they were chiresh, they were deaf. And what did they do? Of course, we can see afterwards, they succeeded, and you saw what happened with Churchill and so many other people. And of course, you have the story that's well known of Google. Everybody laughed, that's impossible, and also with Apple, etc. So it's a big lesson in our lives simply to be deaf, to go on the way that we feel that we should go, and we're in the driver's wheel. Now we'll get back to what happened over there. So here they were, but what was their real mission? Their mission was to check out what's going on. But aside from that, to deliver letters to the diplomatic corps in Jericho of all of the major countries. Jericho was a center, a political center. So they came to deliver to all the diplomatic corps of all the nations of the land an ultimatum. Number one, you get up and you resettle somewhere else. Number two, your second choice is to adopt all the dinim of the 7 B'nai Noach, including no more idolatry. And then you'll become ger toshav. In other words, you'll be a foreign resident. That's the best way to see it. Ger is a stranger. Now, the third one is, if you want war, you'll get it. And they were given, so that was the reason. How they went in and delivered, and before anybody could get angry, they vanished. We all have miracles in the Torah, and here's another one. And they went to hide in a house of a Zonah. There's an argument what it really means, but I think we all know, and it doesn't really matter. It shows that she was running a hotel and giving food, etc. She took them in, and of course, when they came in, she started to tell them, she guessed who they were, and automatically started to tell them what's going on and how the people are scared and really that, and they don't know what to do. And she revealed everything to them. They, in return, revealed the whole mission of HaShem because she was very impressed. She heard what had happened, and everybody had heard what had happened in Yetziat Mitzrayim, in the Midbar. And so, therefore, she was very impressed, and they explained the whole meaning of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And she went through a very fast conversion in her mind, and she believed. When the secret police came hunting, and they guessed that it must only be there, he came to the house to search for them. She locked the door, took them upstairs, and ropes and got them out of the window because the window was right next to the wall in the city. And when she got them out, then she came, opened up the door, and they came in, and she says, I heard a whole lot of noise, and I see they've escaped. Come and have a look. And they believed her because she was a very influential woman. And she saw which way they went. They say, well, she says, look, I saw them run. And she told the opposite way if they went. And of course, this way they never caught up with them and they never found them. And that was the story over there. But then we come back to this whole thing of unity and how important it is. For the American people who will listen to this recording later on, for them they understand, we might have heard of it. There was, ice hockey was a big thing, and Russia always won the prize. And it happened with Russia that one year they lost it to the Americans. So they asked, how did this happen? Their coach was a crazy guy and a tough guy, and he forced them into the practice. They were in pain, they were tired, they couldn't take it anymore. And they said to him, why are you doing this to us? And he said, look here, can you see at the front of your shirt, your T-shirt? There's a badge. There's the flag of United States of America. You've all got to be united in that. But at the back, you have your own personal name. You can't run around as an individual. You've got to be completely united. And of course, they won. Now, why do I mention this story? Because that unity is so important with all of us. And there's so many stories told about how the Jews were in unity. In fact, there was one is about a very smartly dressed Jewish man standing at a bus stop in Israel. And he took out a candy and he said the bracha. And next to him was standing one of these, husky guys with a gun tattooed on his arm. And he offered him one. He says, take one, my brother. He says, what do you mean, my brother? We're brothers. You religious guys ignore us and have nothing to do with us. You don't recognize us. You look down on us. Look at this tattoo. You think? So very quietly, the Jew pulled up his sleeve and showed him a number tattooed. And he says, I also have a tattoo. He says, what difference does that make? He says, I want to tell you something. I learned from my teacher, a very powerful and clever teacher, that this only means one thing. It doesn't matter how many generations back you were converted to Christianity, you were still a Jew, and you will still be murdered, and you're still an animal. That's all you are. And that's how they treated Jews. And he says it didn't matter if somebody was religious, anti-religious. They were left-wing or right-wing. It did not matter. They supported him or didn't. They were all treated in exactly the same way. So he says, who was your teacher? He says, Hitler. Hitler taught me and taught everybody this. Well, the guy was completely shocked. And he says, now I know what you're talking about. And they carried on talking, etc., and exchange addresses, and a relationship built up. But that's how they show the power of unity and how people misunderstand each other. Yes, it's true that a lot of the very religious people ignore and look down and have nothing at all to do with the irreligious, which is stupid. Rav Kook was very successful in bringing, because he said every Jew that serves in the army, that is Kiddush HaShem. Period. Now we go to the United States. Very interesting. I had a friend who was standing outside the liberal synagogue on Yom Kippur. Well, they finished, it was very late at night, and they see a Jew coming out, and he goes into a cab, and he stops, he says, excuse me, I just saw you come out Yom Kippur, you take a cab? He says, well, why not? I'm not religious. Why? I don't believe in any of this. He says, so why are you here? He says, where else would a Jew go on Yom Kippur? That's where I belong. And there's a very emotional story. In Frankfurt, Germany, there was a refugee, a Russian refugee, and the father was completely, totally irreligious, did not want to have anything at all to do with it, and he had died, and he told his son, I want you to promise me one thing. We'll never forget you're Jewish. Never forget to say Kaddish for me. That at least a Jew must do. So he made a personal undertaking that every year on Yom Kippur he would go to hear the prayers, because everybody said Yom Kippur is so important, and there he will say Kaddish. So every year he went. One year, Chazan, the cantor, was finishing the whole tefillah. It was already Motzei Yom Kippur, and he was the one who had to lock up, and he locked up the synagogue, went outside to unlock the gate so that he can go out because of security. And there's a man standing there, and he says, what are you doing here? He says, I came to pray and say Kaddish on Yom Kippur. He says, what are you talking about? That was today. You've made a mistake on the dates. the guy burst into tears and told him what he had promised. He says, how can I? Is it possible as a Jew not to be here? I've got to be here. I've got to say it. So the Chazan had pity on him. He took him back into the synagogue. He took him up on the podium, on the bimah, and he started to sing the whole of Kol Nidrei from the beginning till the end. He was starving, but he still did it. He had such Rachmanut, pity on the man. And he let the man say Kaddish. He didn't tell him, listen, you need a minyan. You don't need a minyan. This is just, if you've got the Sifrei Torah there, you go ahead. And he said Kaddish, and he was so happy. He hugged him, and they went out of the synagogue, and, they said their goodbyes, and the man was so appreciative, and of course he locked up, and he went home, and he was very happy to sit down and eat. So here you have what can happen. But I'd like to end this with a story which is so powerful. You know, Russia had still a lot of anti-Semitism. They behaved towards Jews exactly like the Nazis, no different. And so the Jews were frightened to keep anything. And a young 17-year-old boy was recruited into the army. There, if a Jew goes into the army, he's finished. As a Jew, he's finished, if he even comes out alive. The boy was so religious, he went to his Rebbe and he says, what shall I do? He says, look, I can't help you. You're going to go in, but I'm going to give you some advice. Shabbat, under every circumstances, you keep. You keep. They won't kill you. The second thing is that kashrut, even if you're starving, you keep. You only eat what you're allowed to eat. And here is a book on milah, brit milah, circumcision. I want you to learn it off by heart. I want you to understand it and know it. And he went off. So he was in the camp, and he somehow survived. One day, there was an inspection from a very high-ranking officer at the camp. And he goes around, a surprise visit, and he sees the whole place was in a mess, and the discipline was ridiculous, and the boots were not polished, etc. So he says, how can this be? He says, you know what it is to manage this rebel? He says, but I've got one person, he happens to be Jewish, but he listens to every single order, he polishes through. Come and have a look, his bed's tight, everything is perfect. He's very, very organized. So the man says, you bring him to me. And he turned around and he says, what's going on here? I hear you keep a day off. He says, how can you do that? You work for the Tsar. You're not allowed to do that. He says, look, there might be the Tsar, and I'm in the army. But I have a master of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I will never listen to anyone else on that. He says, and what's this business about food? You don't eat. How can a soldier fight in the Tsar's army and be hungry? How could that be possible? And he says, that's it. The Tsar's important, but my HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my God, is more important to me. And I'm only his servant, no one else's servant. So the officer took out his gun, put it against his forehead, and he says, look, you must now agree that you are not going to keep Shabbat anymore. I don't want to know. And he says, well, I'm afraid you'll have to kill me because I'm not allowed to keep it, and that's it. And then he took his gun and put it on his heart. And he says, look, if you don't undertake to eat kosher and stop all this nonsense, I'm going to shoot you. So he says, well, you'll have to shoot me because I will not change. The officer put his gun back in his holster, gave the guy a hug, and he says to him, I want to tell you something. I'm Jewish. I'm not religious. If they knew I was Jewish, they would kill me, especially if I want to practice something. My wife and I just had a little baby boy. We want him to have a Brit Milah. But I didn't want to take anybody who doesn't believe. I wanted to take somebody who sincerely believes in what he's doing and the importance of it. You prove that. He took him home. They did the Brit. Of course, thank God, he was told to learn that off by heart, the instruction manual and how and to do it. And he then discharged him from the army because he had the power to do it and let him go home. And that is a story that we all have to remember. The unity of Am Yisrael is so deep. And of course, I'll give you a bracha, but it's to be expected, and you can guess what I'm going to say. That each one of us in our hearts should have Unity. We should feel together unity with our family and with Am Yisrael and even within ourselves. And that'll only bring us happiness. And that's what we should think of all day. Everybody that we have an argument with, or we don't have anything to do with anymore, or we, whatever it is, because it might be the last words you say to them or they hear from you. And therefore, unity. Love everybody and feel the love of everybody and have a wonderful day. Thank you.